Welcome back to Conroy and Kroger. Now we're going to have a discussion about what's happened to the changing face of journalism throughout the world with Aleks Vickovich, the editor of the digital editor of Your Money here at Sky, and Catherine Murphy from The Guardian. Welcome to you both.
G'day.
Hello.
Well, Catherine, you've been in print journalism for almost all of your working life, and you moved it
for a century or so, yeah.
And you moved into an online production. What's the most significant change that you've had to deal with career-wise, in terms of skill-wise, to move from, you know, the deadline of 5 o'clock in the evening to the 24/7 Guardian production?
Yeah, well, this is such a huge topic, and I congratulate both of you for trying to embark upon it. The biggest change is from a set of finite deadlines, finite space, finite deadlines, limited communication between journalist and audience in any given 24 hours, to almost constant communication between journalist and audience in the space of 24 hours. Now, it sounds like a small thing. It sounds sort of unremarkable. It sounds not that not transformative, but it is transformative in every respect. It's transformed the way people consume journalism. It's transformed the way that the public engages with journalism, and it's had a profound impact, I think, on politics and governing, going from a sort of steady, orderly, linear tempo to a waterfall, in essence.
Aleks, it seems to me that, you know, to take Catherine's point, you look at modern journalism, the pressure on journalists these days, particularly the digital ones, or those writing for digital publications, must be immense. I mean, you know, I get calls from journalists, they want something out at 11 and 12 and 1 and 2, it just never stops. The old news cycle, when I was president of the Liberal Party 30 years ago, you'd get a call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Nowadays, there's just constant pressure. So it's a remarkably changed world, as Catherine said. And the issue for me is the quality of what's being put out during the day when there's so much pressure. In the old days, the journalists had a whole day, basically, to put a story together. They get to work, deadline at 7, it would appear in the next morning. In second or third editions, it could be changed if there was a problem. But, boy, the pressure on young journalists today must be absolutely immense.
Yeah, look, no doubt. I think I'm coming from a very different vantage point, in that when I started my career, perhaps a little bit after Catherine Murphy, you know, the industry had already become disrupted. That digital disruption had already happened. And so I think that, you know, there is an enormous amount of pressure on journalists that day, but that kind of constant communication with consumers that Catherine talks about there, I think is one of the really positive parts of the digital media age, because, you know, to the point that you're making there, Michael, it is difficult to get things right when you've got to do 10 stories a day, 20 stories a day, and have that constant communication going. But at the same time, I think there's a level of transparency that you get through correcting things in real time, as opposed to perhaps, you know, making, not being as upfront about mistakes or in hoarding information. And I think, you know, that's one of the main ways in which the digital media world has changed the industry. You know, it's not just a different medium going from paper to the internet. I think as well there's a different mindset that comes along with that. You know, there's a two-way conversation that happens now with consumers. And I think, you know, trust in the media is low, and understandably so. So, you know, the amount of time that you can reduce between receiving the information and verifying it and getting it to consumers, I think that can only be a good thing. The longer that you hold on to that information and don't push it out to consumers, you know, the more that you are part of the elite, part of the problem, and not working on their behalf. And I think that's why you see, for example, journalists now going to social media first. You see people like Laura Jays on this network who very much are breaking news on Twitter to try and reduce that gap, and live blog and other forms of digital media are all about reducing that gap. But no doubt you're right, there's a lot of pressure in our line of work.
Catherine, you were mentored by one of the legends of the press gallery, Michelle Grattan. And I know that she had time to take you through the journalistic practices. How hard is it for you to mentor in the same way that Michelle Grattan mentored you in today's, you know, 24/7 media environment?
Well, it is one of the downsides. I run an office in Canberra with 4 reporters. They're all fantastic people, but they're at a stage where they're developing their careers. And I know I have a lot less time because I'm also very prolific myself in my output to actively mentor them. Now, I do my best, and I think they think I'm not entirely terrible at it, but I also know that when we weren't filing as much, when we weren't filing around the clock, I and journalists in my cohort, journalists of my age, with my experience, had the benefit of a lot of hands-on help from people who were in the position that I hold today, who are political editors and bureau chiefs in their respective organisations.
Catherine, help us with the judgment call you've got to make. Someone calls, they give you a story, they give you a tip. In the old days, you had time to try and verify a source. Where do you get the balance? How do you make that judgment? Oh, I've got to be first, or I've got to verify that this is the truth.
Well, I think in the disrupted media environment, your word is your bond. I think you can't rush to the audience with information that you're genuinely uncertain about, because the audience will quickly learn that you're not to be trusted, that your insights are not to be trusted. So it's a balance. You can't sprint and break your neck. You've got to go at an orderly clip. No one can sit around thinking about information in the way that we did in the print era. You do need to get those facts in front of readers much more quickly than you used to. And there's problems potentially with verification and other things that are associated with that. But it's not so much verification that's the issue, although it can be, it absolutely can be in exactly the scenario you described, Stephen. But it's more that what the print news cycle did that the digital news cycle does not was filter out to separate the new from the important. What the print cycle did was basically, because of the rationing involved in it, you could only communicate with your readers once a day. There was a time to separate out what is important, what will still be important in 24 hours' time, versus what is new right now. And the primacy or the currency of the digital news cycle is new, not important. And so what occurs as a consequence of that is news consumers get a whole lot of information, which in the print era, some of which they wouldn't have gotten. Now, I totally agree. With our other guest this evening that there's a great democratising force associated with the digital news cycle, and I too welcome that.
Could I throw to Aleks for a second, Catherine? Aleks, given that you report and your reports can sometimes move markets, how do you deal with the truth, accuracy and fact issue? How do you make that judgment?
Look, I think on the one hand, you do need to have that accuracy. As Catherine said, it's a hugely important part still in the digital age. And partly that's because I think, that's going to be our competitive advantage. The media is not going to win intention, engagement against the social media giants when they've got 70% of audiences and advertisers, unless we have that kind of verifiable public interest journalism. That is going to be the way that we become profitable. At the same time, though, I think I disagree with part of what Catherine's saying. I think that is an old school journalist mentality in terms of the distinction between what is important and what is new. I think the idea that the media should decide what is important has been disrupted. I think the mob should decide what is important and what is important to them, and that consumer consumers first mentality, I think, is really what's driving the digital age. We look at what's trending, we listen to our audiences, we have a constant back and forth engagement with them on social media in real time, and they can tell us what they think is important. And what our job is, which hasn't changed, is to help them make sense of a complex world. Particularly with Your Money, we focus on, you know, the business world, trying to help aspirational families and households understand a really complex financial system. I think that kind of central, you know, tenet of journalism to act in the consumer interest is still there. But I think that, you know, we really do need to allow them, you know, greater say in the process, and that democratisation has simply happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, Catherine and Alex, thank you very much for your time tonight. Stephen, I think this is a debate which will never end. So we appreciate you being with us.
Good on you.